Welcome to this explainer. Right off the bat, we're stepping into a completely different kind of headspace today. Picture a dark, psychological haunted house. In the corner of a damp, decaying room, a small, jagged shadow detaches itself. Its eyes are just gleaming with this sharp, bitter light of what philosophers call resentment. This shadow is our narrator for the day. Let's call him the Cynical Gremlin. And he's here to basically systematically dismantle all of our grand, comforting philosophical illusions. We're diving into a grim, dark, gothic fable steeped in Nietzschean philosophy and philology, exploring what actually happens when the grand architectures of the human soul are completely torn down. Imagine hearing that in a voice that sounds literally like dry parchment being torn in half. Our gremlin, yeah, he doesn't care for high-minded ideals at all. He practically thrives on cynical knowledge. When we look up at human ambition and see these soaring, beautiful cathedrals of purpose, he looks down and sees, well, nothing but the damp rot of a basement. He embodies the spirit of negation, just ripping away the fancy outfits of philosophy to expose the bare, really uncomfortable machinery underneath. Okay, let's dive into this concept because it's absolutely crucial for understanding the gremlin's whole worldview. Normally, we think of liberation as this glorious, beautiful untying of our bonds, right? We just call it freedom. But our gremlin frames this exact same thing as grausame Entbindung, which translates to terrifying freedom. It's not a relief, it's a horrific untying. It's not skipping through a sunny meadow. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a violent expulsion straight into an absolute vacuum. A void that doesn't know your name, totally doesn't care about your soul, and offers zero comfort. It's exactly this terrifying realization that sets the stage for the dark parables we're about to get into. Chapter 1. Shared Failures of the Noble. So, the gremlin introduces us to two totally distinct figures trying to find meaning in this void. And the kicker? Despite their wildly different approaches, they're both about to share the exact same failure. First, take the blind weaver. He represents passive Weltschmerz, that kind of noble world pain. The guy spends his entire life weaving a glorious masterpiece for a king, only to discover the throne is completely empty. He didn't break because he was some exposed instrument of the heavens. No, he broke because he never bothered to check if the chair was occupied before he even started the loom. His grand, tragic realization is just the sound of a puppet realizing there never were any strings to begin with. But then contrast that with Siegfried, who's practicing destructive amor fati, a radical love of one's fate. In his intense drive toward becoming the Übermensch, he shatters his anvil and just shouts defiantly at the frost. Well, the gremlin basically mocks him as a heroic popsicle. Why? Because Siegfried just destroyed the one tool that could have kept him warm. By inviting the lethal frost to be his master, he turns into a blue sepulcher. He freezes into a rigidity that is far more absolute than the iron anvil he hated so much. Which brings us to this spectacularly biting assertion from our narrator. Nobility is just a more expensive way to fail. I mean, wow. Whether you're the passive, blind weaver looking for meaning in the heavens, or the self-authoring ascetic literally breaking your tools to conquer nature, you both hit the exact same dead end. The gremlin just looks at these grand noble tragedies and laughs. To him, it's all just a massive waste of energy in the dark. And the real reason they both fail? It's something called der Geist der Schwere, or the spirit of gravity. This is the real antagonist in our fable today. It's this unseen, totally indifferent, crushing force. And honestly, it doesn't care if you're an active destroyer screaming at the sky or a passive dreamer working away at a loom. The spirit of gravity flattens them both exactly the same. As far as the gremlin is concerned, Siegfried isn't any more successful than the weaver. He's just screaming a lot louder while gravity crushes him. Chapter 2. Worshipping the Iron Shackle. Now we head back to our haunted house to meet a spectral captive, the doppelganger. This is where we explore how absolute subjugation can morph into a really twisted form of self-preservation. Just think about how his psychological transition maps out here. First, he faces that lawless, terrifying vacuum we were just talking about. Then, the pure horror of that freedom forces him to retreat, shrinking all the way down into a nameless wisp. And finally, as a coping mechanism, he lovingly polishes the remnants of his former subjugation. He takes his old iron shackles and treats the act of polishing them like a religious ritual. It is the absolute ultimate expression of what Nietzsche called slave morality. Now, you might think the gremlin pities this captive, but he really doesn't. In fact, he actually calls the captive a genius. Because the captive intuitively grasps this really dark truth. Without that iron shackle, he has absolutely no identity to carry into the day. The shackle is what gives him definition. In this incredibly grim calculus, it's infinitely better to be a phantom tethered to a history of pain than to be a living, nameless wisp just floating endlessly through a lawless void. Chapter 3: The Eternal Starfinder. Let's completely shift our scale for a second to the vastness of the cosmos. We're going to examine the Staraphanto, the starfinder who just stares out at dying suns through obsidian rings. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer depth of the gremlin's cynical knowledge, getting right into the philology of it all. The starfinder claims he's achieving this noble cosmic isolation, but if you actually look at the roots of the words, the gremlin connects star, which means stone still, with sturban, meaning dead. So this supposed cosmic enlightenment, it's really just voluntary petrification. The Starfinder is literally turning the entire universe into a collection of unmoving, dead objects simply to avoid the dizzying, terrifying horror of having to make a single living choice. The Starfinder essentially becomes a monument to eternal petrification. He tracks these old, dead illusions across the infinite void for one very specific reason, so he never has to look at the living. He is spiritually dead entirely by his own design. It's this massive defense mechanism masquerading as deep philosophy, giving him a way to dodge the terrifying untying of actual existence. Chapter 4: Mercy of the Last Man. So as we reach the climax of our fable here, the gremlin takes all these dark parables and synthesizes them into one final commentary on where true, terrifying wisdom actually lives in this universe. He argues that real wisdom isn't found in the lofty heights with Siegfried, and it isn't out in the cosmos with the Starfinder, no. It's found in the emerald dungeon of the voluntary herd. Just think about the trade-offs being made here. The herd is actually wise enough to fear the verdant spark of autonomy. They'll gladly trade the painful, incredibly expensive nobility of the soul just to have the cozy warmth of a shared delusion. They outright reject the whole concept of becoming because they see it as a choking multiplication that leads straight to a vacuum. Instead, they embrace the warm rot of the herd. They willingly choose the comfortable cage of Nietzsche's last man over the lethal, freezing frost of genuine independence. So the crucial takeaway here is this. The gremlin basically leaves us totally stripped of everything. No grand cathedrals, no heroic destinies, absolutely no noble suffering. All that's left is the realization that the very things holding you down might actually be the only things keeping you from vanishing completely. The weight of the anchor, whether that's the shackle, the herd, or the delusion, is literally the only actual mercy you possess in a universe that is completely governed by the crushing spirit of gravity. Which leaves every single one of us with a truly impossible dichotomy. The cynical gremlin has shown you the basement, right? He's shown you the absolute truth of terrifying freedom. So I have to leave you with this impossible question to chew on. Will you die rigid, a blue sepulcher completely frozen in the lethal frost of your own autonomy? Or will you choose to live rotting and warm in the comfortable cage of the last man? Keep that in mind the next time you catch yourself trying to build a cathedral in your soul.